Thank you very much for having me come and talk today. Like the previous speaker, I think you'll notice, I don't know if his was intentional or not, but mine was actually to not have any slides because I've done these presentations a few times, and I know you're all further along than I was in terms of thinking about commercialization, because this was never on my radar. It was never something that I thought that I wanted to do or thought that I would do with my career. It was sort of a really fantastic surprise way to move my career along. So the fact that you're here says you know a little bit more about maybe what you want to be doing than I necessarily did. But I started off in a, obviously very traditional academic career. I received some great funding from the CCTS, and as part of that, I submitted my first invention disclosure, as well as the first patent that was issued. And we were trying to study, and we still are trying to study, a muscle that's been very understudied. The ciliary muscle is a muscle in the eye, and it is involved with a whole lot of things related to what happens when you focus up close, everything from that to the development of presbyopia, which is a condition that is experienced by everybody who's over the age of 45, and that'll come up again in a minute, where you can't see up close anymore, as well as it appears to be related to myopia development, so whether or not individuals develop nearsightedness. So I started off with that, and it was a pretty simple invention where we just came up with a new way to look at the ciliary muscle so that we could measure it, and we looked at image segmentation, and it was novel and patentable, and so we did. The problem was with that particular idea is that it was very, very undeveloped in terms of a commercial product as well as what the market would be. Since I was one of the only people, I still am actually, unfortunately, one of the only people in the world who's looked at the ciliary muscle in any great detail. I have thousands of images of it, and nobody else on the planet does. It just hasn't been studied because it wasn't visible. But these sort of getting me thinking about, even though that hasn't come to a commercial product yet, it started me thinking about what I do in my laboratory and how the ideas that I have, my ability to solve problems, to come up with solutions, would be something that would help in terms of moving into a career in commercialization. So as I started thinking about some other things I was doing in my laboratory and furthering that research related to the ciliary muscle, I realized very quickly that there weren't great ways of measuring how well the eyes are aligned. The method that we use currently is manual. It's time intensive. It also actually requires a great deal of expertise. And so in order to do that, you have to go through a lot of training, that kind of thing, and it's also not very repeatable. So we use prisms, we cover and uncover one eye, and we measure these little prisms that we pull out of a case, how well the two eyes are aligned. In doing my ciliary muscle research, I wanted something more repeatable, and I wanted a better way of measuring it, because that would mean that I wouldn't have to recruit as many subjects. If you have a better way of measuring something, you can do that. And as I started thinking more and more about it, I started thinking about the fact, well, if it's not good enough, if the measurement isn't really good enough for standard clinical research, is it really good enough for clinical practice? Is there an unmet need here? Certainly in screening school children, school nurses don't have time to do a lengthy test, and when they're trying to identify children with vision problems, they also don't have necessarily the technical expertise. We train our students at the College of Optometry for months on how to do this test well, and they get to see huge number of examples in the course of their clinical training of eye alignment problems to identify it accurately and move things along. And school nurses, I don't know how much training they get on it. I'm sure it's not nearly enough. And I think Tim's back there agreeing with me on that point. And so I started to realize that there was this unmet need. I also knew that as I progressed through my idea about this was that there were other things. I went to so I encourage you to continue doing things like you're doing today. It will change the way that you think. So I went to a hackathon, I guess is what it was technically called, over at TCO, because I had submitted a couple of invention disclosures by this point in time. And I was over there, and I had this idea percolating about the, being able to measure eye alignment better. And at the hackathon, I saw somebody doing something somewhat misguided in terms of the, how hard the FDA approval would be and that sort of thing. They're trying to use a smartphone to detect concussions, which you might be able to do, but the road to, some inventions, as the previous speaker mentioned, some inventions and devices never get to market, not because they're not good ideas or that they wouldn't be valued by the community, but the pathway to market is so expensive and so difficult and fraught with so many problems that it's just not able to overcome those hurdles to get there. So it's one thing to have an idea, and it's something completely different to have it to a place where you can get that idea to market and generate sales off of it. And that's one of the things, as you go to more of these sessions and you learn more about commercialization, you'll start to think a little bit differently. You'll start to realize, okay, this is why this product works this way. I see that now. I always thought that was kind of goofy, but it works that way, or it's labeled that way because that's how they did it to get FDA approval, or they put it in this category to do this or that. And so I encourage you to continue attending these things if you're interested in this and learn more about it. When I was at this hackathon, I saw them using an iPhone, and they were using the camera to measure pupil size. And all of a sudden, I realized, I'm like, oh my goodness, most of the instruments that we use in our clinical practice are the combination of a computer, a light, and a camera. In ophthalmological practice, the instruments are actually quite simple. I think my experience in medical devices has been a little bit different than what our previous speaker described. So I think there are some areas that are certainly a little bit different and might have a slightly different paths to market. But I think that in general, I have seen that huge number that are exactly like he described. My story is actually slightly different from that. But so I started working with this in a company in TCO, and we ended up developing, I'm working with a local startup company called Sight for All, and we're working towards taking a software application that would be, you would have to have a particular code. You'd have to demonstrate that you have a license in order to be able to use the instrument, some sort of professional license, either as a registered nurse or as an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, something along those lines. And you'd be able to download the app and use your smartphone to give an estimate of the person's glasses prescription, as well as another module of the app that measures eye alignment. And the road to that was long, much longer than any of us thought that it would be. We're still not quite to market yet. We ran into some software development difficulties that we have gotten over that hurdle recently and are working towards finishing up our clinical studies so that we can take the device to market. But I think that, one of the things that everybody underestimates, so when you talk to business leads, when you move things along, even the innovation studio that talked earlier, they said you can't have 6 to 8 months to do this, you have to do it in 6 to 8 weeks. Nothing ever happens fast enough for anybody in this community. And so if you can get used to that, but also just keep taking a deep breath and realizing that if it doesn't happen as fast as you want it to, that also does not necessarily mean it's all going to fall apart and then it won't ever happen. It'll just take longer. I also worked on because again, as I started thinking about these things, it changed the way that I thought as an inventor and as a scientist. And so I teach contact lenses, introduction to contact lenses, and in really trying to do my best job of teaching students that, I did what most of you have probably done, and you become an extreme expert in something. And you're probably unparalleled in the world. There's probably nobody else in the world that has exactly the same expertise that you do by nature of your being here at this university and knowing as much as you know. And that is one of your greatest assets as an inventor that I didn't realize that I had. And I think the previous speaker also alluded to that. And he's right, the other companies are not out there looking for the latest things, which sort of shocked me when I got into doing this sort of thing. They also don't, in my humble opinion, they don't hire people to work for them who are as talented as all of you. So I think that you have that advantage when you're thinking about these things, that you're used to solving problems, you're used to thinking about things that didn't exist before that can exist now in the knowledge that you create. So in developing this app, I also started thinking about my contact lens designs, and I realized that there are at least 100 patents trying to make a particular kind of soft bifocal contact lens. And as I started thinking about this problem, now that I've become more of an inventor and thought about, if I was trying to do this, how would I make it work? Why have all of these other designs been such a miserable failure? If I was going to do this, how would I make it work? And when I started thinking about it, I realized they were all trying to do exactly the wrong thing. They were making the wrong part of the contact lens thick and the wrong part of the contact lens thin. When we reversed it, we have been able to develop what I hope has been, we've submitted several patents around this technology, and also has been recently licensed to another local startup company through the great help of TCO. And we had this contact lens, and we've been able to build a prototype, even though that took years to find somebody who could make it for us, and to generate exactly what we needed in terms of size and shape and dimensions to get the technology to work. Been able to generate a working prototype, but we, like the previous speaker talked to you, we couldn't get any contact lens company interested in this technology. And until we had data. They said, if you have data and you show us this works, then we might be interested. But to get to that point is somewhat difficult. So my first pathway to market for the first device that was a software application is pretty easy. You don't have to have a sales force necessarily to sell a software application. You have to have good advertising, because people can download it and that sort of thing. And you know, we'll see at some point in time we may need to generate a sales force in order to make that work. But what we've ended up doing was a little bit more unusual with this particular contact lens is that we got a small contact lens company. Once we had a little bit of a prototype that I begged somebody in engineering, and we used an accelerator award to get made, and worked around and kept talking to people and talking to people. I probably ran into 50 dead ends in trying to get this up and running. And in the end, a very small contact lens company is now partnering with this startup company, and they were way more willing to talk to this startup company about the contact lens and partnering than they would have been to try to navigate working with the Ohio State University. So if you're intimidated by the idea of, you know, I really want to stay in academia, I don't want to, maybe some of you do want to take a pathway which I think the other two speakers will talk about, where you want to move out of academia and into the business world, that's great. There's great ways to do that. I didn't want to do that. I'm happy here in academia. I want to invent things and just keep spinning them out of the university. And that's the career path that I have chosen to do. And TCO has been great in terms of helping me find partnerships in order to find people that I trust with my baby, the technology that I've been working really hard on, that they're going to take it in and they're going to do the right things with it. So, but this small company has now partnered with this other small contact lens company, and suddenly now we are off to the races. We're getting prototypes made, we're starting our clinical trials and moving forward with rapid speed. They're doing all of the fundraising. I am not doing any of it. Not that I don't think I could be capable of it. It's just not really what I want to do with my career. So one of the things I think when I've gone and talked to these presentations, sometimes I think they've done a great job today of showing you a variety of things of what different inventors can do with their technologies and different kinds of technologies. And I also think there's different career paths. And the great thing about entrepreneurial work is that you can do whatever you want. The idea is to do something other people haven't done before. So don't feel like as you're heading down a pathway, you have to do something specific. And the more adaptable and inventive you can be in every single aspect of what you're doing, including your own career, the more successful you will be, to be perfectly honest. So you don't have to take a rigid pathway, and you can keep trying certain things. There are certain rules. I think there's major companies are not going to just license your idea. They're going to want to see data. You're going to have to work with a startup company. You're going to have to do things. You're also going to have to change. What I was hoping to convince you a little bit about today is something that I learned. I'm sure throughout today you've heard a whole bunch of terms and lingo and things that you may not have heard before. People talk about things in a different way in the entrepreneurial world. There's a lot of terms and language changes than what you would hear in normal academia. Also, the reason why I don't have slides today is specifically because when you're giving your pitch and you're talking about what you're doing, you're gonna have to talk about it in a very different way than what you might normally if you were going to a scientific conference or if you were giving a seminar in your college or something along those lines. You're gonna have to present yourself and your ideas in a completely different way. I was used to, from the earlier parts of my career, having to justify my ideas and show people tons of data and talk about all these other things. And the thing I found right away was the business leads didn't want to see any of that, really. It was amazing to me how little they asked me to see that kind of thing. That's what I was expecting. But they're going to ask you other questions like, who's your first customer? Who are your first 1,000 customers? Who are your, these other things? What do you know? What does this company do? What does that company do? And I used to never go to the exhibit hall when I went to conferences, and now I pay a lot more attention to everybody else's products, everybody else's information, things along those lines. So you have to change things up a little bit in terms of what you do. The first pitch that I gave, if these things make you nervous about going and giving a pitch at a startup snapshot or something along those lines, the two men who helped me at TCO, unfortunately, they were really great. They're no longer, they've moved on to other positions and other places. But the first time I went and gave my first pitch, it was terrible. It was truly awful. It was really way more of an academic talk than it was a pitch for a product. I probably practiced that pitch 1,000 times. I think I went over to TCO for at least 3 sessions where they criticized me and gave me positive, constructive feedback on what to do differently, but you can't give your presentation like this. And Paul Reeder, who I know has moved on to there's a Center for Innovation of some sort, I can't remember the exact name of it, where he's now the director there, but he was at TCO at the time. He took my slides and he said, okay, Melissa, he goes, let me help you with your slides. He gave them back to me and they were beautiful. I couldn't believe what he did and how much he changed them. And they looked professional, they looked polished, they looked not academic, which was good. And then I rehearsed and gave a really great pitch for our software application at that first startup snapshot. And so one of the things I'll encourage you is that TCO may need to take you and mold you and help you to fit into what this business world expects to see. Because if you go and you give a pitch that looks like an academic talk, they're not going to listen to you. You have to know who your audience is as you're communicating your information, and you're going to have to do all of that completely differently from what you might normally want to do. But the good news is in my experience, they're very willing to help you, and they're very willing to give you that constructive feedback that you need to take what you're doing and to change it. And to be perfectly honest, I found that moving into, last thing I'll say, and then we can move on, but I think it's break after me. I'm keeping you all between you and cookies and the bathroom. But the last thing I would say is that what I came to realize as I was doing this, and one of the things that really motivated me the most was that I felt like this was a way of taking what I'm doing in my career and working in entrepreneurial activities and in commercialization and making it meaningful. Making sure that at the end of my career, my work just wasn't a whole bunch of lists of publications on my CV that have never really impacted clinical care or any patients' lives or anything different. So our app is something that can be used by people all over the world. Essilor, which is a company that makes spectacle lenses, they're the leading manufacturer of spectacle lenses, they estimate that 2.5 billion people in the world need glasses and can't get them. They don't have any way to get their prescription measured accurately. So our app is going to fill a need not only here in the United States, but also internationally. And it's translational work. If I was developing these things in my lab, the best way to get everybody in the future to use these things that I'm going to learn about how we focus up close and how the ciliary muscle works is if they have the same tools in the clinic that I have in my research lab. That is the best way for what I'm studying to impact what they're going to do. I also feel like moving into the entrepreneurial world has made my writing, my scientific writing, as well as my scientific presentations more effective because it's really made me think more about what does my audience want to know? What do they want to hear? How can I, even when I'm giving a scientific presentation, how can I pitch that a little bit better? So even if you never invent anything or never move anything out of this university in terms of an invention disclosure, I think you'll be better for having gone through this process and thought about it because you're going to think a little bit differently, a little bit more broadly, and a little bit more about what the need is for your research, even if it's not commercializable on that other end. And so I think those are the biggest things that I've taken away is that commercialization is just really a type of translational research that you can very much do as part of an academic career. And I'll leave it at that, and I think we're to a break now, am I right? And I'll be happy to answer questions at the break, and we have the Q&A session later as well.